Becca, you're still such an unthoughtful and worthless wife as always. This was a trip that my son and I were looking forward to. You, who have no part in this, can go home right away. So my mother-in-law starts nagging me the moment my husband leaves the table. We were on an overseas trip that my husband asked me to plan. Well, if she goes that far, it's inevitable I'll go home. What happens to the two of them after that is none of my concern. My name is Becca, a married woman working for a multinational corporation. Since my job is easy to manage in terms of schedule, I've been working mostly remotely since getting married, so I spend more time at home. My husband Jack is the type who overvalues himself and always wants to look good. He's a big spender and has never contributed a penny to our household. I didn't realize this while we were dating, but after we got married and started living together, his true nature gradually emerged. His mother seems to enjoy bragging about her son. I've heard of mothers who dote on their sons. I was prepared for that to some extent, and was willing to tolerate it. But she is obstinate and strong-willed. She doesn't listen to other people's opinions. She even completely ignores her husband's opinions because she believes that her son is the best. She doesn't like me at all. Every time we meet, she always has some snide remark. She seems to particularly dislike the fact that I live comfortably on my son's salary alone. She keeps nagging me, saying, "You're still young, you should work outside." I've explained many times that I continue to work after marriage and that I have a job that I can do from home. But in her mind, working from home is just a part-time job. She assumes that I'm just pretending to work by always looking at my computer. She presumes that I'm probably playing games. Apparently, I'm a worthless wife who doesn't do housework properly and only plays computer games despite being a stay-at-home wife. My husband, of course, understands my work style, but he has never explained it to his mother, even when it's said right in front of him. He turns a blind eye. Even when I asked him to explain it well, he says he wants us women to handle it well and completely throws it at me. He even says he doesn't want to get involved in troubles. Once, when I persistently asked him to do something similar, he threw a completed divorce paper at me. It urged me to be treated like that, but I thought about divorcing him. But I heard that getting a divorce is more difficult than getting married. It would be a problem if it were more difficult than the current situation, so I ended up giving in to my husband's argument. I understood that my husband prioritizes his mother in everything. It's frustrating, but I feel like I need to find a way to deal with her while skillfully deflecting her. I didn't agree to divorce because of this change in my feelings, but it seems that my husband thinks I'm head over heels for him and didn't want to break up. His pompous attitude is getting worse day by day. It's cute when a child tries to act grown up, but when an adult does it, it's rather a turnoff. I've learned to ignore his pompous words and act as if I haven't seen his actions. There is another reason why I didn't divorce him. Due to my husband's job, we live quite a distance from my in-laws. We meet once a year, or at most, twice a year. I thought I could tolerate that much. While the world was making a fuss about having 9 consecutive days off, if you take a vacation on weekdays, both my husband and I were working. In my case, American holidays don't matter much because I adjust my schedule according to international circumstances. As for my husband, it's just that he wasn't taking 9 consecutive days off according to the calendar. When he returned home after his first day back at work, he announced, "Let's go on an overseas trip." When I asked him what he was talking about, he said that his colleagues had taken a vacation and made it a 9-day holiday to go on an overseas trip, and he was quite proud of it, which made him incredibly annoyed and regretful. I was dumbfounded by his childishness, but I haven't been on a trip this year, so I suggested a domestic trip. The reason being, my husband has no experience with overseas trips, so if we were to go overseas, he would have to apply for a passport. "There won't be a problem if you're with me. You're fluent in multiple languages," he said. I studied abroad when I was a student and had been on many overseas trips when I was single. In addition to English, I can hold a conversation in Spanish and a bit of Chinese if necessary. When my mother back home got hooked on Korean dramas, I studied Korean with her. However, I didn't get much opportunity to use it, so I'm not very confident. Sure, compared to my husband, I might be good at languages, but that doesn't mean that applying for passports will be finished in a snap. I tried to persuade him to go abroad during the summer or winter, but he wouldn't listen at all. On the contrary, despite having no experience, he decided on the country to visit, took leave without permission, and told me to make it work on the schedule. It's not a tour. Why should I have to act with strangers? He furthermore declared. He said that English is a universal language and that we should have no problem if it's just the two of us. I thought maybe it's fine, but before I knew it, he said, "That's right. I promised to take Mom along. I'll count on you for that too. Your mother-in-law too. Even for me, taking care of two inexperienced people abroad is too much. You should show some filial piety once in a while. Maybe you can gain some favor by doing so. Our entire kind and good husband, this is for your own good, Becca. You should be grateful." He said things that made it seem like he was doing me a favor, but arguing against it started to seem foolish. I decided to quietly make reservations as my husband instructed, and I came up with another good idea. Starting from applying for my mother-in-law and husband's passports, booking flights and hotel reservations, it's a lot of trouble, but in order to implement my idea, I patiently fulfilled all my husband's wishes and created a perfect schedule. On the day of the overseas trip, my mother-in-law, who knows nothing of my troubles, cheerfully and childishly exclaimed, "Just as I expected from my son. It's a long journey overseas. The seats are business class, aren't they?" Knowing my husband, he probably said something like, "I'll take you there." He probably bragged about himself, saying things like, "I made the reservations and planned the schedule." The truth is, I did everything, and my husband did nothing. They did nothing, and left all the procedures to me. What's more, the two of them, who have hardly any experience with airports, moved around on their own while I was doing the procedures. They walked around aimlessly, even when it was boarding time, and I had a hard time finding them. The airport staff even asked, "Would you like us to make a call announcement? It's Becca's fault for not telling us the boarding gate." It was such a fuss, but they showed no remorse, saying, "And this wife was planning to have fun by herself, leaving us behind." During the flight, they behaved relatively quietly, but it was honestly annoying and embarrassing every time they called a flight attendant. Several hours later, we arrived in the destination country. After finishing immigration procedures and such, just when I thought I could finally head straight to the hotel and take a break, my husband turned pale and said, "I'm going to the bathroom," and thrust his luggage at me and ran away. I don't understand why only my husband got sick when we ate the same thing. He had been grinning and calling his favorite flight attendant. I guess this is his divine punishment. Serves him right. Becca, you really are an inconsiderate daughter-in-law. How long are you planning to stay here? My mother-in-law said, "This trip, my son planned it for me. It's a mother-son trip without the need for a daughter-in-law. You're a money grabber who doesn't even work. How brazen of you to think you can enjoy this trip for free. Go home now." Are you sure? Whether it's good or bad, I can't have fun when you're here. I see. That's not good. All right then. I'll go home now. I handed my husband's luggage back to my mother-in-law, only taking my carry-on, and turned my back to her. My mother-in-law, who received my husband's luggage, was stunned and had a very vacant expression on her face. It's not possible for her to react like that when she told me to go home. I was doing my best to hold back my laughter. My husband seemed to have been going in and out of the bathroom several times, so we didn't cross paths. Luckily, I was able to get a ticket back to America, so I became a passenger on the plane headed there. Originally, I had planned to find a chance to return home alone. If we had a good relationship, I wouldn't mind being taken around as a tour guide, but not with that mother and son. It's only stressful for me, and I will gain nothing. I can't stop grinning just thinking about what the two of them, who can't speak anything but English, will do when they are left behind. If they think a little, they should be able to manage with the translation function of their smartphone app. But I can't imagine my husband, who likes to show off and inflate his own importance, doing something like that. When I safely returned back after making a few detours, I headed straight to the luxury hotel where my parents were waiting. My husband Jack told me to show respect from my parents, so I treated them to a luxury trip in upstate New York. They were to travel there leisurely on a popular scenic route, enjoying the scenery and meals along the way. I managed to meet up with them earlier than planned, much to their surprise. When I briefly explained the situation, they were taken aback. They were astounded that I had agreed to such a request from Jack. My phone was bombarded with calls and messages from Jack, all of which I ignored. I switched off my phone and enjoyed this day to my heart's content. When I returned home after partying with my parents, I received a call from the embassy. According to their explanation, Jack had returned from the restroom to find his mother, my mother-in-law, sitting alone. Despite being surprised that I was not there, he was livid. He tried to contact me but couldn't get through, so he decided to make his way to the hotel by himself. However, not knowing where to go, he was visibly flustered when a kind person spoke to him in broken English. He was led away after being told that they knew the place and would take him there, only to be robbed of all his money, passport, and valuables. My mother-in-law was even stripped of her jewelry. When he was found standing on the street looking destitute, the police picked him up and referred him to the embassy for help. That's how he was able to contact me. The embassy official asked me to come and pick him up. He couldn't withdraw money because his wallet, which contained his bank cards, had been stolen. However, I asked back why I, a stranger, had to do that. I explained that I was already divorced from the man who was there. The truth was, I had kept the divorce papers he had thrown at me some time ago. Back then, I decided not to proceed with a divorce as I had heard it would be a lot of trouble. But this time, I had reached my limit. After filling in the divorce papers, I headed to the hotel right after landing back in the States. To my surprise, the divorce was accepted without any fuss. I already had a new place lined up, and the contract had been signed while making the travel arrangements. I didn't want to use the furniture I had shared with Jack. It made my skin crawl. In my new place, I planned to buy everything new, so I packed for both a trip and the move at the same time. All I need to bring to the new place is my work tools and my favorite clothes. I could easily have everything else sent by the courier at a specified date and time. The embassy staff did not ask anything more from me, and the conversation ended. Later, it seems my former mother-in-law had pleaded with my former father-in-law, and with his help, my ex-husband Jack and ex-mother-in-law were able to return to the States. However, Jack, who had blown his top, contacted me. "You left me and divorced me without my knowledge, abandoned," he exclaimed. "No, I just obeyed your mother's instructions to leave. If you have any complaints, talk to your mom. And please consider the business class flight I arranged for you on your return as my farewell gift," I responded. I also reminded him that he was the one who had first brought up the divorce papers. I only filed the divorce papers he had prepared, fulfilling his wish for a divorce, I clarified. "Do you think such sophistry will work? How much more do you want to embarrass me?" Jack retorted. "Embarrassed? How so? If you want to feel embarrassed." "I have a better story. Want to hear it?" "What is it?" "Well, did you know you're a regular at an adult entertainment club? You're pretty invested in a favorite girl there, aren't you? Rather than contributing money to the household, you are heavily splurging on her. But you ended up in debt when her demands escalated. I had an investigation agency look into a debt collection letter addressed to Jack that had been delivered to our house. Although Jack was a good spender, his obsessive behavior seemed to be a turnoff. His favorite girl's true feelings were that she thought he would eventually stop coming if she kept asking for more money and expensive gifts. I wonder what Jack felt when he heard that. That's quite an embarrassing story, isn't it? If you make any more fuss or contact me again, I'll spill the beans to your company. Got it. Being disliked by the girl he was infatuated with would be an unbearable humiliation for Jack, considering his personality. If this became known, it would be a great embarrassment. Jack, who until now had been aggressive, just said, "Goddard," in a feeble voice and ended the call. A few days later, my ex-father-in-law contacted me. He told me he had also divorced his wife, my ex-mother-in-law. I thought it was unnecessary as we were no longer related, but it seems he contacted me to expose my ex-mother-in-law's true nature, as we both have been treated poorly by her. My former father-in-law, suspicious of his wife's behavior, investigated while she was out and discovered that his retirement savings had been depleted. The money was apparently spent on beauty treatments and cosmetic procedures. As I'm not familiar with such things, I was totally unaware. When asked for a women's perspective, I was stumped because I hadn't noticed it either. I guess seeing someone only once a year makes changes more noticeable, but I truly hadn't picked up on anything. I even asked my former father-in-law, "Are you sure it's for beauty treatments?" She seems to have sunk quite a bit into it, but there's no visible change. Perhaps there were slight changes that only my former mother-in-law could notice. It felt like throwing money down the drain. Naturally, my former mother-in-law, who was kicked out penniless, turned to her son, Jack. However, Jack, the backbone of the family, is up to his eyeballs in debt after his divorce from me. He even lost his apartment for failing to pay the rent. Now he and his mother seem to be living in a drafty, run-down apartment. Yet, his mother has no intention of working and won't quit her beauty treatments. On top of repaying his debts, the burden of his mother's beauty expenses is weighing heavily on Jack, who I hear is working around the clock. It seems the vanity of wanting to present a larger-than-life image, even in the face of a declining living standard, doesn't change. If they're content with this situation, I won't say another word.
The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs as angry voices echoed through our two-story colonial. I glanced at my phone, 2:17 a.m. This wasn't their usual fighting hour. My name is Eli Ora, but everyone calls me Eli. At 17, I'd gotten pretty good at reading the rhythm of my parents' arguments. This one felt different, more final somehow. How long? My father's voice cracked with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. How long have you been lying to me? I crept to my bedroom door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. Mom's response was too quiet to make out, but Dad's bitter laugh cut through the silence like a knife. 12 years, Blythe? Our entire marriage has been built on lies. My stomach dropped. 12 years. The same age as my half-sister, Zara. She was sleeping over at a friend's house tonight, thankfully missing whatever storm was breaking over our family. "James, please," Mom pleaded. I never meant to. To what? To destroy everything? To make a fool of me? Another crash, followed by the sound of keys jingling. I can't even look at you right now. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. I rushed to my window, watching as Dad stormed out to his car. The engine roared to life, tires squealing against wet pavement as he peeled away into the darkness. Mom stood in the doorway, her silhouette small and defeated in the porch light. I should have gone downstairs. Should have demanded answers. Instead, I crawled back into bed, pulling my covers up to my chin like I was still a little kid who could hide from monsters under blankets. Sleep didn't come. The next morning, everything changed. 2 police officers stood in our living room while Mom collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. Their words blurred together. Wet roads, sharp turn, no guardrail. Dad's car had been found at the bottom of Miller's Ridge. "Mrs. Wyndham," one officer said gently, "I'm so sorry, but your husband didn't survive the crash." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the door frame, my knees threatening to buckle. Mom's sobs filled the room, but all I could hear was Dad's voice from last night, raw with betrayal. His final words in our house haunting me, "I can't even look at you right now." Hours passed in a fog. Relatives started arriving, aunts, uncles, family, friends. Everyone speaking in hushed tones, offering casseroles and condolences. But Grandma and Grandpa Wyndham, Dad's parents, were noticeably absent. When I asked Mom why, she just shook her head and said they were traveling. Late that afternoon, I found myself in Dad's study, breathing in the familiar scent of old books and coffee. His reading glasses still sat on his desk, next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. A photo of us caught my eye, Dad teaching me to fish when I was 12, both of us grinning at the camera with matching sunburned noses. "Eli?" Mom's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway, eyes red and puffy. "Grady's coming over to help with arrangements." Grady Bellamy, Mom's friend from work who'd been spending more and more time at our house lately. Something cold settled in my chest as pieces started clicking into place. Did Dad know? The words slipped out before I could stop them. "About you and Grady?" Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. "This isn't the time, Elira." But it was exactly the time. Dad was gone, and his last moments alive had been filled with anger and betrayal. I turned back to the photo, unable to look at her. "When will it be time, Mom? When you're ready to admit what really happened last night?" She didn't answer. Her footsteps retreated down the hall, leaving me alone with Dad's ghost and questions that would haunt me for months to come. One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. 6 months after Dad's funeral, Mom married Grady in our backyard. I watched from my bedroom window as they exchanged vows under the maple tree where Dad had built my childhood swing. The same tree he'd promised to hang fairy lights in for my graduation party next spring. Mom wore a cream-colored sundress and a smile I didn't recognize. Zara scattered rose petals, beaming at her role as flower girl. The small gathering of guests, mostly Grady's friends and family, applauded as they kissed. No one seemed to notice or care that Dad's parents weren't there. That half of our family was missing. "Eli?" Zara's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She stood in my doorway, still in her pale pink dress. "Mom wants you to come down for pictures." "I'm not feeling well," I said, the same excuse I'd used to avoid the ceremony. "Maybe later." Zara's face fell. "But we're family now." "Grady says." "Grady isn't my father." The words came out sharper than I intended. Zara flinched and guilt twisted in my stomach. None of this was her fault. "Sorry," I softened my tone. "I just need some time, okay?" She nodded and disappeared downstairs, where laughter and music drifted up through the floorboards. I turned back to my window, watching as Grady led Mom in their first dance. His hand rested possessively on her lower back, and something in his expression made my skin crawl. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Zara was asleep, I crept down to the kitchen for water. Voices from the living room stopped me cold. "We need to discuss what to do about Elira," Grady was saying. "Her attitude is affecting Zara." "She's grieving," Mom replied, but her defense sounded weak. "It's only been 6 months. It's been long enough." Grady's voice hardened. "We're a family now, Blythe. Either she accepts that, or we need to consider other options." "What do you mean, other options?" "My sister's running that boarding school in Vermont. They have openings for the spring semester." The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile floor. Silence fell in the living room. "Eli?" Mom called out. "Is that you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I ran back upstairs, my bare feet silent on the carpet. Behind me, I heard their muffled argument resume. The next morning, I woke to find boxes stacked in the hallway. Grady was directing movers, pointing out which furniture stayed and which went. "What's happening?" I asked Mom, who was supervising from the doorway. "Grady's moving in properly now," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We're making space for his things." I watched as they dismantled Dad's study, packing away his books and awards. His presence being erased piece by piece. When they reached for the fishing photo on his desk, I snapped. "That's mine," I said, snatching it before the mover could wrap it in paper. "Eli," Mom started, but Grady cut her off. "Let her have it," he said smoothly. "She'll need something for her dorm room, after all." My blood ran cold. So they'd already decided. That afternoon, I found Dad's old laptop buried in one of the boxes headed for storage. I smuggled it to my room, desperate for any connection to him. When I powered it on, a document was still open, an email draft dated the night he died. "Mavis," it began. "I know why you've been trying to warn me about Blythe. Tonight confirmed everything. I need your help protecting." The message cut off there. My hands shook as I read it again. Grandma had tried to warn him? About what? A knock at my door made me quickly close the laptop. Grady stood there, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Family meeting downstairs," he said. "We need to discuss your future." I nodded, my mind racing. Dad's unfinished email felt like a key to a door I didn't even know existed. Whatever Grandma Mavis had tried to tell him, whatever truth she knew, I had to find out. But first, I needed to stop them from shipping me off to Vermont. The family meeting about Vermont never happened. Instead, I spent the night digging through Dad's laptop, looking for any connection to my grandparents. My search led me to a password-protected folder labeled Family Matters. After 3 tries, I cracked it my birthday, followed by Zara's. Inside, I found dozens of emails between Dad and Grandma Mavis, dating back 12 years. The most recent ones made my stomach churn. James, the DNA test results confirm what we suspected. Grandma had written, "You need to confront Blythe about Zara. And about Grady. This deception has gone on long enough." The timestamp showed Dad had read this email the morning before he died. A soft knock interrupted my reading. "Eli?" Zara's voice came through the door. "Can I come in?" I quickly closed the laptop. "Sure." She slipped inside, clutching her pillow. "I had a bad dream. Can I sleep here?" Looking at her now, knowing what I knew, made my heart ache. She wasn't just my half-sister, she was Grady's daughter. Dad had raised her believing she was his, while Grady and Mom kept their secret. "Of course," I said, moving over. As she settled in beside me, I noticed she was wearing Dad's old college sweatshirt as a nightgown. The sight made me want to cry. "Eli," she whispered in the darkness. "Why doesn't Grady want you to stay?" My breath caught. "What do you mean?" I heard him talking to Mom. "He said you're too much like Dad, that it's not healthy for anyone." Before I could respond, footsteps creaked in the hallway. The door opened, revealing Grady's silhouette. "Zara," his voice was tight. "What are you doing in here?" "I had a nightmare. Back to your room." "Now." She scrambled out of bed, shooting me an apologetic look before scurrying past him. Grady lingered in the doorway. "We need to establish some boundaries," he said. "Zara's impressionable. She doesn't need to be influenced by your attitude." "You mean she doesn't need to remember Dad?" The words felt dangerous in my mouth, but I couldn't stop them. "Or is there something else you're worried about?" His expression shifted, something cold flickering behind his eyes. "What exactly are you implying?" "Nothing," I said, but my hand instinctively moved to cover Dad's laptop. "Just wondering why you're so eager to send me away." He stepped into my room, closing the door behind him. "Listen carefully, Eliora. Your mother and I are trying to build something here. A fresh start. If you can't be part of that, there are other options. Like Vermont? Like wherever necessary." His gaze fell on the laptop. "What's that?" "Schoolwork." "On your father's computer?" He moved closer. "Hand it over." "No." I clutched it to my chest. "This isn't a request." He reached for it, but I scrambled backward. "Get out of my room." The door burst open. Mom stood there, looking between us with wide eyes. "What's going on?" "Your daughter's been going through James's personal files," Grady said. "Who knows what she's found?" Mom's face paled. "Eli, give me the laptop." "Why?" "Afraid of what else I might discover." I opened it, hands shaking. "Like these emails from Grandma Mavis? Or the DNA test results?" The color drained from Mom's face. Grady's hands clenched into fists. "How long were you going to keep lying?" I demanded. "Dad knew, didn't he? That night, when he left, he finally figured it out. About you too. About Zara." "Enough." Grady's shout made me flinch. "Blythe, handle this." "Now." Mom stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Sweetheart, please. It's complicated." "No, it's really not." I slammed the laptop shut. "Dad died thinking his whole life was a lie. And you're still lying, aren't you? To Zara, to everyone. Vermont isn't optional anymore," Grady cut in. "You're leaving next week." I looked at Mom, waiting for her to defend me. She just stood there, silent tears running down her face. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "But first, I'm calling Grandma Mavis." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mom's gasp told me everything I needed to know. There were more secrets to uncover, and my grandparents held the key to all of them. Finding Grandma Mavis's number wasn't hard. It was still in Dad's phone contacts. What was hard was working up the courage to call while Grady and Mom were downstairs, probably plotting my exile to Vermont. I paced my room, phone clutched in my sweaty palm. The sound of Zara practicing piano drifted up through the floorboards, the same melody she'd been working on since Dad taught it to her last year. The thought of leaving her behind made my chest ache. Finally, I pressed call. 3 rings. 4. Then, hello? Her voice was exactly as I remembered, warm and strong. Grandma? Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Elira? Is it really you? Yeah. My voice cracked. I found Dad's emails. About the DNA test. About Mom and… Where are you? She cut in, urgency replacing warmth. Are you at home? Yes, but… Listen carefully, sweetheart. Don't tell anyone you called me. Your grandfather and I are 3 hours away. We can be there by… The line went dead. I spun around to find Grady in my doorway, his hand on my room's phone jack. Calling hours are over, he said, pocketing the cable. You can't keep me from talking to my grandparents. Actually, I can. He stepped closer. Your mother signed the boarding school paperwork this morning. You're leaving Sunday. That's in 2 days. Better start packing. I pushed past him into the hallway, racing downstairs to find Mom. She was in the kitchen, methodically loading the dishwasher like everything was normal. You signed the papers? I demanded. Without even talking to me? She wouldn't meet my eyes. It's for the best, Eli. You need a fresh start away from all this. All what? The truth. The past, Grady said from behind me. Which is where it needs to stay. The piano music stopped abruptly. Zara appeared in the doorway, her face pale. You're leaving? No, I said, just as Mom said yes. But why? Zara's voice trembled. Is it because of me? Because I told you about what Grady said. Zara, Grady's tone carried a warning. Go to your room. No. She moved closer to me. I don't want Eli to go. I saw something dangerous flash in Grady's eyes. He stepped toward Zara, but I moved between them. Don't, I said quietly. Don't you dare try to intimidate her like you do everyone else. Grady, Mom started, but he held up his hand. You want to know why your sister's leaving? He asked Zara. Show her the emails, Eli. Tell her everything you found. About her real father. About… Stop. Mom's shout made us all jump. A glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. In the silence that followed, I could hear her ragged breathing. Mom? Zara's voice was small. What's he talking about? I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She had Grady's eyes. How had I never noticed before? The truth sat like poison on my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Nothing, I said finally. He's talking about nothing. Grady smiled, cold and triumphant. He knew he had me cornered. I could tell the truth and destroy Zara's world, or I could leave quietly and protect her from it. I'll go pack, I said, my voice hollow. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of Dad's reflection in the kitchen window. No, not Dad. Grandfather August, standing on our back porch with Grandma Mavis beside him. They must have already been on their way when I called. Grady followed my gaze and cursed. Mom dropped another glass. Zara, I said quickly, remember how Dad always said the truth sets us free? She nodded. Well, I think it's time for some truth. All of it. The back door opened, and my grandparents stepped into our kitchen like avenging angels. Grandma Mavis took one look at me and opened her arms. I ran to her without hesitation, leaving chaos erupting behind me. Grandma Mavis's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and safety. I sat at her familiar oak table, watching steam rise from my tea while Grandfather August paced behind me. We'd left chaos at my house, Mom crying, Grady threatening legal action, and Zara locked in her room, refusing to speak to anyone. Your father suspected for years, Grandma said, sliding a worn leather journal across the table. But he couldn't prove anything until he found this in Blythe's desk last spring. The journal was Mom's. Inside, detailed entries chronicled her relationship with Grady, starting long before I was born. Before she even met Dad. He was going to confront them that night, Grandfather August said, his voice heavy. We begged him to wait, to let us help him gather more evidence for the divorce. Evidence? I looked up from the journal. Evidence of what? Grandma exchanged a look with grandfather. Your father discovered some irregularities in his company's accounts. Large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts. I don't understand. Grady was your father's financial advisor before he married your mother, grandfather explained. He'd been embezzling funds for years, using your mother's position as company secretary to cover his tracks. The room tilted sideways. Dad's accident. Might not have been an accident at all, Grandma finished softly. A sharp knock at the front door made us all jump. Through the window, I saw Mom's car in the driveway. I'll handle this, Grandfather said, moving toward the door. Wait. I stood up. I want to talk to her. Eli. She owes me the truth. All of it. Mom looked smaller somehow, standing in Grandma's living room. Her eyes were red, her hands twisting together nervously. Where's Grady? I asked. At home with Zara. She swallowed hard. He doesn't know I'm here. Like Dad didn't know about you and Grady all those years? She flinched. I never meant for any of this to happen. Grady. He can be very persuasive when he wants something. Like Dad's money? Or his life. That's not, I didn't know about the money until after. She trailed off, tears spilling down her cheeks. When James confronted me that night, I panicked. I called Grady, told him everything. He said he'd handle it, but I never thought. You never thought he'd actually kill Dad? My voice cracked. Or you just never thought anyone would figure it out? Eli, please. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your mother. No. The word came out sharp as glass. My mother died the night Dad did. I just didn't know it until now. A sound from the hallway made us turn. Zara stood there, tears streaming down her face. She must have followed Mom. Is it true? She whispered. Did my dad? Did he kill James? Mom reached for her, but Zara backed away. Sweetheart, it's complicated. Stop lying. Zara screamed. Everyone just stop lying. She ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist like she used to when she was little. Despite everything, she was still my sister. Blood didn't matter. Dad had taught us that love was stronger than DNA. What do we do now? Zara asked, her voice muffled against my shirt. I looked at my grandparents, then at Mom, who seemed to have aged years in minutes. The journal on the table held enough evidence to destroy Grady, but using it would mean destroying what was left of our family too. We tell the truth, I said finally. All of it. To the police, to everyone. Grady will never let that happen, Mom whispered. He'll what? Grandfather's voice was steel. Kill someone else? Try to send Eli away? We have evidence now, Blythe. Real evidence. My phone buzzed, a text from Grady. Come home now. Or everyone learns what really happened the night your father died. I showed it to the others. Mom went pale. He's bluffing, she said, but her voice shook. Maybe, I replied, already grabbing my keys. But I'm done running from the truth. Grandma caught my arm. You're not going alone. I looked at my sister, still clinging to me, then at the journal that held our father's death warrant. No, I agreed. We're all going. It's time to finish this. The house was dark when we pulled into the driveway. Too dark. Even the porch light was off, which Mom never allowed. Grandfather August insisted on calling the police, but I knew we couldn't wait. Every minute felt like another chance for Grady to destroy evidence, to bury the truth even deeper. He's expecting me, I said, gripping Mom's journal in my hands. Just me. Absolutely not. Grandma Mavis started, but I cut her off. Dad died trying to protect this family. I won't let that be for nothing. Before anyone could stop me, I was out of the car and up the front steps. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house felt wrong, like walking into a familiar room where all the furniture had been shifted slightly left. Grady. My voice echoed in the darkness. In here. His voice came from Dad's old study. I found him sitting at Dad's desk, illuminated by a single lamp. Dad's laptop was open in front of him, and beside it sat a familiar object that made my blood run cold. Dad's phone. The one the police said they never found at the crash site. Wondering how I got this? Grady's smile didn't reach his eyes. Amazing what you can retrieve from a ravine if you know where to look. You went back that night, I said, to clean up evidence. Smart girl. Just like your father. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I remained standing. Where's Zara? Safe. Away from all this mess you're creating. He leaned forward. You know, James made the same choice you did, choosing truth over family. Look where that got him. You murdered him. I protected what was mine. His voice hardened. Like I'm going to do right now. The front door opened. Mom's voice called out, followed by Grandma Mavis's. Grady's expression darkened. I told you to come alone. I did. I held up the journal. And I brought what you really want. His eyes fixed on it. Your mother's little diary. James was so proud of himself for finding it. It has everything. The affair, the money transfers, all of it. Hand it over. I took a step closer to his desk. Tell me what happened that night first. The whole truth. He studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. Your father was going to ruin everything. The life I'd built, the future I'd planned. He called that night, said he was going to the police. I couldn't let that happen. So you followed him. I tried talking sense into him first. When that failed, he spread his hands. Sometimes accidents are necessary. Footsteps approached the study. I needed to keep him talking, keep him distracted. And Mom? Did she know? Blythe knows what she needs to know. Just like you're going to forget what you think you know, unless you want Zara to grow up without both her father and her sister. The threat hung in the air between us. I thought of Zara, already losing one father, now learning the truth about another. The journal felt heavy in my hands. You're right, I said quietly. Sometimes we have to protect what's ours. I held out the journal. As Grady reached for it, I let it fall. In his moment of distraction, I lunged for Dad's phone on the desk. But Grady was faster. His hand clamped around my wrist, twisting until pain shot up my arm. The phone clattered to the floor as he yanked me forward, his other hand going to my throat. I tried to be reasonable, he snarled. Tried to give you a chance to be smart about this. Let her go. Mom's scream came from the doorway. Everything happened at once. Grady spun me around, using me as a shield. Grandfather August appeared behind Mom, holding something that glinted in the dim light. And there, in the corner of the room, stood Zara. She must have been hiding there the whole time, recording everything on her phone. It's over, Grady, I managed to say through his chokehold. The truth's already out. His grip tightened. Then I have nothing left to lose, do I? The last thing I saw was Mom lunging forward, terror in her eyes, as Grady dragged me backward toward the window. Then everything went black. I woke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the sensation of someone holding my hand. For a moment, I thought it was Dad, like when I had my appendix out at 12. But when my eyes focused, I saw Grandma Mavis, her face etched with worry. Welcome back, sweetheart, she whispered. The events in Dad's study came rushing back. Grady is in custody. Grandfather August stepped into view. Zara's video and your father's phone provided enough evidence. The police are reopening James's case. My throat felt raw where Grady's hands had been. Where's Zara? Here. She appeared at my bedside, eyes red from crying. I'm so sorry, Eli. I heard him on the phone earlier, planning to send you away. I knew something was wrong, so I hid in the study and recorded everything. You saved us all, I told her, squeezing her hand. A commotion in the hallway drew our attention. Mom burst in, followed by 2 police detectives. 5 minutes, one of them said. Then we need your official statement, Mrs. Bellamy. It's Wyndham, Mom corrected sharply. I'm going back to Wyndham. She approached my bed cautiously, like I might shatter. Eli, I need to tell you something. About your father's trust fund. The one he set up for my college? No. She pulled out a familiar envelope, the one I'd seen in Dad's desk the night he died. This is his letter to you. The one Grady tried to destroy. It explains everything. With shaking hands, I opened it. Dad's familiar handwriting filled the page. My dearest Eli, if you're reading this, then my suspicions about Grady were correct. I've documented everything, the embezzlement, the threats, the affair. But more importantly, I've secured your future. The trust fund isn't just for college. It's everything I had, transferred to an account only you and your grandparents can access. I knew Grady would come after me once he discovered what I'd done. But I couldn't let him steal your future like he stole our family's trust. Protect Zara. She's innocent in all this, and she'll need her big sister more than ever. And Eli? Remember what I always told you about truth and justice? Sometimes they come at a terrible price. But they're worth fighting for. All my love. Dad. I looked up at Mom, who was crying silently. You knew about this letter? Grady found it first, she admitted. He used it to convince me to marry him. Said he'd destroy everything, the evidence, the trust fund, our family, if I didn't help him cover up what happened to James. So you chose him over the truth? Over Dad's justice? I chose what I thought would protect you and Zara. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The detective stepped back in. Mrs. Wyndham, it's time. Mom straightened her shoulders. I'm ready to tell the truth. All of it. Wait. I caught her hand. Dad's letter. He wanted justice, but he also wanted us to heal. To be a family again. How can we? After everything? By choosing truth this time, I said. Together. Zara moved closer, taking Mom's other hand. For a moment, we stood connected, 3 generations of women choosing truth over fear. Mr. and Mrs. Wyndham, I looked at my grandparents. Will you help us? Grandma Mavis wiped her eyes. That's all we've ever wanted, dear heart. The detective cleared his throat. There's one more thing. We found something else at the house. A recording on James's phone. From that night, my heart stopped. Dad's last moments, preserved in digital memory. Do you want to hear it? The detective asked. I looked at my family, broken but healing, fractured but not destroyed. Dad's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes truth and justice come at a terrible price. But they're worth fighting for. Yes, I said firmly. We need to hear everything. Because that's what Dad taught me, that truth, no matter how painful, was the first step toward healing. And we had a lot of healing left to do. 1 year later, I stood in front of Dad's grave, brushing autumn leaves from his headstone. The trial had ended last week. Grady got 20 years for Dad's murder, with Mom receiving immunity for her testimony. The recording from Dad's phone had captured everything, including Grady's confession before he forced Dad's car off the road. Ready? Zara appeared beside me, carrying a bouquet of Dad's favorite sunflowers. She lived with me and our grandparents now, her choice after Mom started therapy and moved into a small apartment across town. We were all healing, but at different paces, in different places. Almost. I pulled out Dad's old journal, the one I'd found hidden in his desk after the trial. I want to read him something first. Zara nodded, settling cross-legged on the grass. I opened to the last entry, dated the morning of his death. My greatest fear isn't dying. It's leaving my girls without showing them that love is stronger than blood, that truth matters more than comfort. And that family isn't just who we're born to, but who we choose to become. He was right, Zara said softly. About all of it. A familiar car pulled up to the cemetery gates. Mom, right on time for our weekly visit. These meetings were still awkward, filled with careful conversations and tentative steps toward forgiveness. But we kept showing up, week after week, choosing truth over comfort, just like Dad taught us. Girls? Grandma Mavis called from behind us. Your mother's here. I closed the journal, tucking it back into my bag next to the acceptance letter from Dad's alma mater. The trust fund he'd set up would cover my tuition, but it was his words, not his money, that had guided me here. Mom approached slowly, carrying her own flowers. Her hair was graying at the temples now, and grief had etched permanent lines around her eyes. But there was something lighter about her these days, like setting down a heavy secret had allowed her to stand straighter. I found something, she said, holding out an envelope. In my old diary. Inside was a photo I'd never seen, Dad teaching me to write my name, both of us laughing as I scribbled backwards letters across his legal pad. On the back, he'd written, Eli's first story, about a family of birds who flew in different directions but always found their way home. I was cleaning out the storage unit, Mom explained. Thought you might want it for your dorm room. My throat tightened. Next week, I'd be heading to college, leaving behind the cemetery, this town, all these ghosts. But not the truth, never that. Thanks, I managed. Then, surprising us both, I hugged her. Zara joined us, then Grandma Mavis and Grandfather August. We stood there, this patchwork family held together by choice rather than obligation, by truth rather than comfort. Later that night, as I packed my room, I found one last surprise, a sealed envelope that had fallen behind my desk. Dad's handwriting again, but this time addressed to both my daughters. Zara sat beside me as I read. My dear girls, by the time you read this, you'll understand that family isn't always what it seems. But here's what I know for certain. Love doesn't care about DNA. Truth doesn't bend to convenience. And strength isn't about never falling. It's about who helps you stand back up. Eli, protect your sister's heart. Zara, guard your sister's spirit. Together, you're stronger than any secret, any lie, any storm. And remember, sometimes the hardest paths lead us exactly where we need to be. All my love. Dad. I looked at Zara, this sister who wasn't my sister by blood, but was my sister in all the ways that mattered. She smiled, tears in her eyes. He knew, she whispered. He knew all along, and he loved us anyway. No, I corrected gently. He loved us completely. Because that was Dad's final lesson that love, like truth, doesn't need qualifiers. It simply is. And sometimes, that's enough to build a future on.
When the New Year's Eve I spent alone was over, my aunt and uncle appeared early in the morning. Vanessa, let's leave this house. They said they had obtained permission to adopt me. I, now their adopted daughter, began to study intensely as a way to repay my aunt and uncle's kindness. 15 years later, as I was making a name for myself on TV, my biological parents reappeared. Then, I decided to execute a certain plan. My name is Vanessa Hansen, and I am 33 years old. I have successfully turned my life around. I have an older sister who was always considered adorable, and was even talked about as potential child actress material in our neighborhood. I should clarify that the person I surpassed was not my sister. Indeed, if I had, my life might have been entirely different. As a child, I was the complete opposite of my pretty sister. My sister was charming, kind-hearted, and smart. She had her persona figured out from a young age, and she was simply perfect. Both my parents and all the adults around adored her. I, on the other hand, was the only one in our family who was chubby. I think our faces looked alike, but my puffy cheeks made me unlike my sister. Not someone everyone liked. I was a shy child with no charm, quite grumpy actually. In elementary school, I was nicknamed Mr. Oppo, a strange name for a girl. But it started when a friend overheard my mother mockingly using it on me. You are the opposite of your sister, and perhaps that's what they overheard. This nickname must have reached my parents' ears because by the time I was in elementary school, they seemed to have lost interest in me. There was also a gap in our academic performance. My sister was always among the top in her class, whereas I was towards the bottom. While my sister would get snacks at 3 p.m., I was denied any. Because my chubby figure was blamed on the snacks even though I didn't eat a lot. Despite that, my chubby figure never changed. The differences didn't stop at snacks. For various reasons like birthdays or because she looked cute at a recital, my sister would get new clothes and shoes. I would get her hand-me-downs, which were often too small for my chubby figure. Even when I asked my parents for larger clothes, they would end the conversation with, "You should lose weight." Unfortunately, at that time, I didn't know what dieting was. The only treasure I had was a backpack given to me by my grandparents before they passed away. Later, my sister went on to a private junior high school, having passed the entrance exams for a famous school with high academic standards. At that time, she was so pretty that there were even talks of her getting scouted as a model. My parents, especially my mother, would proudly walk her down busy city streets to attract scouts. However, I don't recall ever going out with my mother after a certain age. Once, my sister suggested taking me along, but my mother blatantly made a disgusted face and just responded, "Maybe some other time." This only made my sister's kindness highlight my own misery. Years later, I also entered junior high school, but unlike my sister, I went to a normal public school. From the beginning, my parents had declared that they wouldn't waste money on me, feeling like my life had been sealed away as a child. I thought this was just how siblings were treated, unaware of the abnormality of our family situation. However, as I reached adolescence, I started to question things. My mother, though a housewife with supposedly plenty of time, made me do all the household chores and shopping, while increasing her outings with friends. Whenever I wanted to go out with friends, my father would guilt me about the laundry. My sister, being kind, would sometimes help me. But after moving on to a prestigious high school, she no longer had time for me. The harshness of my parents only intensified over time. The first incident was when they missed a three-way meeting at school. During my 3 years of junior high, they only attended once, in the first year, and never showed up for the second and third years. As exams approached, my teacher expressed concern, but I brushed it off, saying my parents were just busy with work. Then came the New Year's Eve incident. That year, my parents and sister went back to my mother's hometown for the holidays without me, saying I should stay home and study since I was an exam student. Likely, they found me annoying. That New Year's Eve, I spent alone, watching TV in an unusually quiet house, shedding a few tears as I went to sleep. The next morning, the incessant ringing of the doorbell jolted me awake. Hesitantly, I checked the intercom and was surprised to see my maternal aunt and uncle standing there. I rushed to the door, still disheveled, and asked what was going on. "Vanessa, let's leave this house. We've already got permission from your mother. Come with us." I was shaken by this sudden proposal. I didn't understand what they meant by leaving the house. "Vanessa, if you don't hate us, we would like you to become our child." Of course, I had never thought ill of them. On the contrary, I loved my aunt and uncle. They were always kind and smiled during our New Year gatherings, gifting me popular sweets and cute clothes. They paid attention to me when my parents and sister ignored me. My aunt and uncle, having no children of their own, had always treated me like a daughter. I never imagined receiving such an offer from them. After hearing the full situation, it turned out they had just been with my parents and heard something outrageous from my mother. They planned to make me work part-time during my high school days to fund my sister's university education. My uncle spoke with increased fervor as he explained, "We cannot just ignore this situation. Vanessa, you have a right to do anything in your free time." I was stunned. My parents were trying to rob me of my future for the sake of my sisters. Their absence at the parent-teacher conferences over the years suddenly made sense. My parents, uninterested in me, didn't care about my dreams or aspirations. They only thought of exploiting me. "We're not your biological parents, but we promise to make you happy." My aunt said this with tears in her eyes as she hugged me. It was the first time in my life that I felt truly acknowledged by an adult. This sense of security left no room for doubt. I decided to become the adopted child of my aunt and uncle. 15 years have passed since then. My aunt and uncle raised me as their own daughter. I received abundant love and had many enjoyable experiences. My aunt would find delicious restaurants to take me to on holidays. And my uncle, wanting to share a drink with me, prepared a bottle of wine from the year I was born for my 20th birthday. I have warm memories with them that I never could have had with my biological parents. Initially, I called them by their names, but over time, they became nothing less than my real parents. And I naturally began calling them Mom and Dad. My uncle once shared something he heard from my parents during a visit home. Vanessa is not going to benefit from going to high school. She's not pretty and not smart. We have a talented eldest daughter. So we really don't need a stupid and flawed daughter like her. My aunt and uncle were furious when they heard this. But my parents showed no remorse. They were serious about making me work part-time. That's when my aunt and uncle decided to discuss adoption. Despite it being New Year's Eve, my aunt, who hadn't been drinking, drove to pick me up. I am truly grateful for that. I wanted to repay my dear parents in some way and become a daughter they could be proud of. With that resolve, I studied hard in high school. It was a rush to get into any school, but once I did, I set goals and refocused. My efforts paid off, and I was admitted to a renowned Ivy League. But getting into university wasn't the end. I wanted my parents to have an easier life in the future, so I continued to study hard, even earning a qualification as a meteorologist while in university, and began appearing on TV. As I pursued my goals, refining myself became enjoyable. I hoped to make my parents proud by being an attractive meteorologist. And after dieting and working out, I came to be known as a beautiful weathercaster. I had the potential to be beautiful since I resembled my sister. Then one day, my biological parents suddenly appeared before me. Vanessa, you've grown up so much. Look how splendid you've become. As I was walking to my car after leaving the TV station, two tired-looking figures appeared before me. Their familiar attitude irked me, but I restrained myself. Their behavior towards me had completely changed. My mother dared to say that her parenting was not wrong, while my father patted my shoulder as if to say, "That's my daughter." Unable to contain my disgust, I glared at them, though they continued speaking nonchalantly. "Since we're here, let's go have a meal at a nice local restaurant." "Yeah, you must be earning a good salary since you're on TV." I felt they were awkwardly trying to ingratiate themselves. Yet their condescending tone from the past would slip through. Instinctively, I knew I should distance myself from them. I needed to make them never want to see me again. Then, I came up with a plan. However, it wasn't time to execute it yet. And a more elaborate opportunity had come to mind. I excused myself, saying I had more work and couldn't join them for dinner today. "Oh, that's disappointing," my mother said with a frown, which I did not miss. I was tempted to shout at them right there, but I prioritized my plan. "There's going to be a small party for my birthday soon, with some people from the TV station. It's a small party, but would it be okay to invite you too? There will be plenty of delicious food, and it'll be fun." Their eyes visibly brightened at my suggestion. "Really? Are actors and such coming because it's a TV station?" "Oh, homie, my mother," I said with a laugh as they got excited, thinking all TV personalities are actors or celebrities. In reality, the party was mainly for meteorologists. Most attendees would be from newspapers and TV stations, with the fanciest guests being announcers and MCs. I casually ignored their eager voices, took their contact information, and left with a promise to reach out again. I'll send you the details for the birthday party. 1 month later, the birthday party took place as planned. Though it was a small party, nearly 100 people gathered. My parents arrived, strutting proudly as if they were showing off their successful daughter. But to me, they were just an embarrassment. Despite my disdain, I had to complete my plan. I greeted them with a smile. Thank you for coming, Mom and Dad. I have a special message for you two today, I said as I took their hands. They looked pleased but were restless, probably looking for celebrities. They whispered to each other, "Isn't that person from that TV show?" Then, I began my speech on stage. After the customary greetings and some playful heckling from the audience, which I responded to with jokes, I turned to my parents. Today, my parents are also here. I indicated towards my parents, and the lighting technician, catching the cue, spotlighted them. Those are my parents, who despite abandoning me during my teenage years, have come crawling back now that they've seen me on television. The room buzzed with murmurs at my words. I had hardly spoken to anyone but close friends about my past. Vanessa. What are you saying? My mother stood up, while my father looked on, stunned. I shared about the discrimination I faced as a child and my parents' indifference. I talked about how I was the only one not given snacks, how I was almost solely responsible for household chores, and how my aunt and uncle, furious upon learning that my parents intended to make me work for the sake of my sister, adopted me. I am cheerful and lively today thanks to my aunt and uncle. They are not here today, but I am deeply grateful to them from the bottom of my heart. I believe everyone here knows me as a cheerful person. That's because my aunt and uncle took me in and continuously showed me love, helping me realize that I was not a worthless child. This allowed me to live confidently and become cheerful. The audience seemed shocked to hear my dark past and started expressing sympathy and condemning my parents, who shrank under their gaze. Mr. Reed from Daily Information, you're here, aren't you? Please include everything, my story and photos, in an article. At my request, as a birthday gift. A journalist friend from a magazine I frequently collaborate with, who had already been taking photos of my parents, responded from the stage. No. Stop it, don't take pictures. My parents panicked, covering their faces. Don't run away. Face yourself properly. I shouted at them. When I was little, you forced me to do this and that, and wouldn't listen when I asked you to stop. It's not fair for you to make me do things and then refuse to endure the same. Tears welled up in my mother's eyes as I rebuked them. I'm sorry. Please, no pictures. Do you want to shame your mother and father? Vanessa, you wouldn't like it if your parents were embarrassed, right? Even now, my parents were trying to garner sympathy. However, I didn't even consider these two as my parents anymore. After abandoning everything a parent should be, what right do you have to feel embarrassed now? It would have been better if you knew this shame when I was a child. Honestly, I was embarrassed too. Embarrassed that these people were my parents. I wished I could disappear into a hole. But this was like a ceremony of closure for me. By severing ties with them completely, I felt like I could truly claim my own life, carrying the greatest treasure of gratitude for my aunt and uncle. Before I knew it, I found myself crying. Observing this, some attendees forcibly escorted my parents out of the venue. It's finally over, truly this time. With a sense of accomplishment and overflowing gratitude towards my aunt and uncle, I felt proud of how much I had grown. Tears blurred my vision, but I felt incredibly refreshed. Later, when the magazine asked if I really wanted to go through with publishing my story, I confirmed without hesitation. The response was greater than anticipated. And while some worried it would tarnish my image, the articles were generally favorable, telling the story of a girl who turned her life around and found her true self by cutting off toxic parents. Meanwhile, my biological parents, following the publication, were seen with disdain by their community and moved away as if fleeing. My father had to quit his job due to the rumors, and they were scraping by, my sister informed me. Even after being adopted, my sister kept in contact, visiting me at my aunt and uncle's home and supporting my decision to be adopted. Knowing my childhood hardships, I later learned that my sister too suffered from our parents' overbearing nature. Triggered by the publication of my story, she distanced herself from them and is now almost completely estranged. 3 years have passed since then. Mr. Reed, who understood my situation and helped publish the article, has become my husband. We are blessed with 2 children and have built a joyful family. Like the unconditional love my aunt and uncle showed me, I pour equal love into my children, hoping to raise them to be empathetic like my sister, who always watched over me from afar. Yet, I have one more thing to do, to repay my aunt and uncle. This year, as usual, I gifted them a trip for their anniversary. We all went to Florida, my husband, children, aunt, and uncle. They say I shouldn't fuss as I have my own family now. But I do it to see their happy faces. It's more for my pleasure than a repayment. Don't take away my fun, I joke, already planning our next destination. Perhaps a trip abroad. It seems the joys of our family will never cease.
The shrill ring of the doorbell pierced the silence of my grief like a knife. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Elizabeth, my mother-in-law, stood there with her lips pursed and eyes narrowed. It had only been 3 days since we buried Mark, and already she was here to disrupt what little peace I'd managed to find. "Clara," she said, her voice as cold as the autumn air that swept in behind her, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "Of course not, Elizabeth. Please come in." She strode past me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors Mark and I had chosen together. I followed her into the living room, where she perched on the edge of the sofa, her back ramrod straight. "I suppose you're wondering why I'm here," Elizabeth said, her gaze sweeping critically over the room. I sank into Mark's favorite armchair, running my fingers over the worn fabric. "I assumed you wanted to check on me. It's been a difficult few days." Elizabeth's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, my dear, I'm not here to coddle you. I'm here to discuss the house." My heart skipped a beat. "The house? What about it?" "Well, now that Mark is gone, we need to sort out the living arrangements. After all, this house belongs to the family." I frowned, confusion settling over me like a heavy blanket. "I'm not sure I understand. Mark and I bought this house together. We built our life here." Elizabeth leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "That's where you're mistaken, Clara. The house was left solely to Mark, not to you. Didn't he tell you?" The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "That's impossible. We saved for years to buy this place. We picked out every fixture, every paint color together." "Oh, you poor, naive girl," Elizabeth said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mark may have let you believe that, but the truth is, this house has always been in the family. His father left it to him in his will." I shook my head, struggling to process her words. "No, that can't be right. Mark would have told me." Elizabeth stood, smoothing her skirt. "Well, he didn't. And now that he's gone, we need to discuss your living situation. After all, you're not really family anymore, are you?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. I rose to my feet, anger burning through the fog of my grief. How dare you? I was Mark's wife. I cared for him after his accident. I gave up everything for him. And now he's gone, Elizabeth said, her voice flat. Your duty is done. It's time for you to move on. I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my voice steady. This is my home, Elizabeth. I'm not going anywhere. She moved towards the door, pausing to look back at me. We'll see about that, Clara. I suggest you start packing. You'll be hearing from our lawyer soon. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the sudden silence. I sank back into Mark's chair, my mind reeling. How could this be happening? How could Mark have kept such a secret from me? I glanced around the room, taking in the photos on the mantel, the throw pillows I'd embroidered myself, the bookshelves Mark and I had filled together. This was our home, our life. And now, in the blink of an eye, it was all slipping away. As the reality of my situation began to sink in, I felt a resolve hardening within me. I wouldn't let Elizabeth bully me out of my own home. I wouldn't let her tarnish the memory of the life Mark and I had built together. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. Aunt Martha, it's Clara. I need your help. You won't believe what Elizabeth just told me. I closed my eyes, letting the warm sunlight wash over me as I sat on the porch swing. The gentle creaking of the chains transported me back to happier times, when Mark and I would spend lazy Sunday afternoons out here, dreaming of our future. Clara, honey? Mark's voice echoed from inside the house. Can you come here for a sec? I found him in the kitchen, surrounded by paint swatches and flooring samples. His eyes lit up as I entered, and he pulled me close for a kiss. What do you think about this color for the living room? He asked, holding up a soft sage green swatch. I wrinkled my nose. A bit too earthy, don't you think? Mark laughed, the sound warming me from the inside out. You're right. How about this blue instead? As we pored over the samples, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Elizabeth standing there, her face drawn and tired. Elizabeth, I said, surprised. Is everything all right? She stepped inside, her eyes darting around nervously. I need to talk to Mark. Mark appeared behind me, his hand resting on my lower back. Mom, what's going on? Elizabeth's chin quivered. Your father, he's gone, heart attack. I don't know what to do. The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and legal meetings. As we sat in the lawyer's office, listening to the reading of Mark's father's will, I felt a growing unease. And to my son, Mark, I leave the family home, the lawyer droned on. I turned to Mark, confusion etched on my face. I thought we were buying this house together? Before Mark could respond, Elizabeth cut in. Of course you are, dear. This is just a formality. The house has always been in the family. Mark squeezed my hand reassuringly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I broached the subject again. Mark, about the house. He sighed, pulling me closer. I know I should have told you, but it doesn't change anything. This is our home, Clara. We've put our heart and soul into it. I wanted to believe him, but a seed of doubt had been planted. The following week, Elizabeth showed up on our doorstep, suitcases in tow. I hope you don't mind, she said, brushing past me. I just can't bear to be alone in that big empty house. Mark and I exchanged glances. Of course not, Mom, he said. Stay as long as you need. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Elizabeth's presence began to wear on me. She critiqued my cooking, rearranged our furniture, and constantly reminded me of my shortcomings as a wife and homemaker. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Elizabeth cornered me in the kitchen. You know, Clara, she said, her voice sickly sweet, I've been thinking. Perhaps it would be best if I just moved in permanently. After all, this is my family home. I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. Elizabeth, Mark and I are starting our own family. We need our space. Her eyes narrowed. Space? In my son's house? I think you're forgetting your place here, Clara. Before I could respond, Mark walked in. Everything okay in here? Elizabeth's demeanor changed instantly. Of course, darling. I was just offering to help Clara with dinner. She seems a bit overwhelmed. As Elizabeth brushed past us, Mark turned to me. You okay? You look upset. I wanted to tell him everything, to make him understand how his mother's presence was slowly suffocating me. But the words caught in my throat. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. Mark kissed my forehead. Why don't you go rest? I'll finish up here. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Elizabeth's voice drift up from the kitchen. "Mark, darling, we need to talk about Clara. I'm worried she's not cut out for this family." I paused, my heart pounding. What was Elizabeth up to? And more importantly, how would Mark respond? As I stood there, frozen on the stairs, I realized that the battle for my home and my marriage had only just begun. The screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal tore through my world like a hurricane. One moment, Mark and I were laughing about some silly joke, and the next, our lives changed forever. I paced the sterile hospital corridor, my heart pounding in my ears. The doctor's words echoed in my mind: paralyzed from the waist down, extensive rehabilitation, full-time care. Elizabeth burst through the doors, her face a mask of fury. "Where is he? What happened?" I tried to explain, but she brushed past me into Mark's room. I followed, feeling like an intruder in my own husband's space. "Oh, my poor baby," Elizabeth cooed, stroking Mark's hair. She turned to me, eyes blazing. "How could you let this happen?" Mark's weak voice cut through the tension. "Mom, it wasn't Clara's fault, please." Weeks turned into months, and our once peaceful home became a battleground. I resigned from my job to care for Mark full-time, learning to navigate the complexities of his new needs. One afternoon, as I was helping Mark with his exercises, Elizabeth barged in. "Clara, the house is a mess. When was the last time you dusted?" I bit back a retort, focusing on Mark's movements. "I've been a little busy, Elizabeth," she sniffed disapprovingly. "Well, if you can't handle it, perhaps we should hire a housekeeper. Of course, that would mean even less money coming in." Mark's face flushed with anger. "Mom, that's enough. Clara's doing her best." I squeezed his hand gratefully, but Elizabeth wasn't finished. "And what about your writing, Clara? Surely you could be doing that instead of whatever it is you do all day." That night, after Mark was asleep, I sat at my desk, staring at the blank computer screen. Elizabeth's words echoed in my mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could be doing more. I started writing, pouring my fears and frustrations onto the page. Before I knew it, the sun was peeking through the curtains, and I had the rough draft of a short story. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a new routine. Caring for Mark during the day, writing late into the night. It wasn't easy, but it gave me a sense of purpose beyond caregiving. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Elizabeth cornered me in the kitchen. "I saw your name in that little online magazine," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Is that what you've been doing instead of keeping this house in order?" I took a deep breath, determined not to let her get to me. "I'm trying to contribute, Elizabeth. Writing helps pay the bills." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Contribute? Please, those pennies you earn are nothing compared to what Mark used to make. Face it, Clara, you're a burden on this family." Something inside me snapped. "A burden? I've given up everything to care for your son. I'm doing my best to keep this family afloat while you do nothing but criticize." Elizabeth's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home?" "Your home?" I shot back. "Mark and I built this life together. You're the guest here, Elizabeth." The sound of Mark's wheelchair interrupted our argument. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. Elizabeth's demeanor changed instantly. "Nothing, darling. Clara and I were just discussing household matters." I turned away, unable to bear the look of confusion on Mark's face. As I busied myself at the stove, I heard Elizabeth's voice, low and menacing. "This isn't over, Clara. You may have Mark fooled, but I see right through you. One way or another, I'll make sure you know your place in this family." As she swept out of the kitchen, I gripped the counter, my knuckles turning white. I knew then that this was more than just a clash of personalities. Elizabeth saw me as a threat, and she wouldn't rest until she had pushed me out of Mark's life, and out of this house for good. I looked at Mark, his worried eyes meeting mine, and made a silent vow. I wouldn't let Elizabeth win. No matter what it took, I would fight for my marriage, my home, and the life Mark and I had built together. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart racing. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice thick with sleep. "Clara, it's Dr. Patel. You need to come to the hospital right away. It's Mark." The world tilted on its axis as I rushed to dress. My hands shook so badly I could barely button my blouse. I called Elizabeth, leaving a terse voicemail about Mark's condition before racing to the car. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I ran towards Mark's room. Dr. Patel met me outside, his face grave. "I'm sorry, Clara. We did everything we could, but the infection was too severe. Mark passed away a few minutes ago." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered, bracing myself against the wall. "No," I whispered. "No, it can't be." I don't remember entering Mark's room, but suddenly I was there, clutching his lifeless hand. His skin was still warm, and for a moment I could almost pretend he was just sleeping. But the stillness in his chest told the truth my heart couldn't accept. "Mark," I sobbed, pressing my forehead to his. "Please, don't leave me." A commotion in the hallway broke through my grief. Elizabeth's voice, shrill and angry, echoed off the walls. "Where is he? Where's my son?" She burst into the room, her eyes wild. When she saw Mark, she let out a wail that chilled me to the bone. "My baby! Oh, my poor baby!" Elizabeth threw herself across Mark's body, pushing me aside. I stumbled back, watching in stunned silence as she stroked his face, murmuring words I couldn't understand. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, well-meaning visitors. I moved through it all in a fog, barely registering the words of sympathy or the gentle touches on my arm. Elizabeth took charge, making decisions about the service and the burial without consulting me. I was too numb to protest. It wasn't until the night after the funeral that reality truly set in. I sat in Mark's favorite chair, clutching one of his sweaters to my chest, when Elizabeth entered the room. "Well," she said, her voice oddly calm, "I suppose we need to discuss what happens now." I looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth sighed, settling herself on the sofa. "Clara, dear, you have to understand. With Mark gone, things have to change. This house, it's been in our family for generations. It was never really yours." Her words pierced through my grief like a knife. "What are you saying, Elizabeth?" "I'm saying that it's time for you to move on, find a place of your own, start a new life." I stood up, anger finally breaking through my numbness. "This is my home. Mark and I built our life here together." Elizabeth's eyes hardened. "No, Clara, this was Mark's home. You were just a guest here, and now your stay has come to an end." "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Mark wouldn't want this." "Mark isn't here anymore," Elizabeth snapped, "and I'm the one who decides what happens to this house now." As the full weight of her words sank in, I felt something inside me break. Not only had I lost my husband, but now I was losing my home, my security, everything we had built together. I turned away from Elizabeth, unable to bear the triumphant gleam in her eyes. My gaze fell on a photo of Mark and me on our wedding day, smiling and full of hope for the future. A future that now lay in ashes at my feet. In that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. I could fight Elizabeth, drag this out in a bitter legal battle that would tarnish Mark's memory. Or I could find the strength to start anew, to honor Mark by living the life he would have wanted for me. As I stood there, torn between grief and determination, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. And somehow, I would have to find the courage to face it alone. I sat on the floor of Mark's study, surrounded by photo albums and memories. My fingers traced the outline of his face in our wedding photo, tears blurring my vision. It had been 2 weeks since the funeral, and the house felt emptier than ever. The creak of the door startled me. Elizabeth stood there, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Still wallowing, I see," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I wiped my eyes, struggling to my feet. "I'm just remembering," I said softly. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "Remembering? Or plotting?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, confusion mixing with my grief. She struck into the room, snatching the photo album from my hands. "Don't play innocent with me, Clara. I know what you're up to." "Elizabeth, please. I don't understand." "Oh, spare me," she spat. "You think if you play the grieving widow long enough, you'll get to keep this house? Well, let me tell you something. This house belongs to the family. To me, you're nothing but a guest here, and your welcome has long overstayed." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "How can you say that? Mark and I built our life here together. This is my home, too." Elizabeth laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Your home? You really are delusional, aren't you? Mark may have let you believe that, but the truth is, you were never more than a temporary fixture in his life. In our family." I felt something snap inside me. That's not true. Mark loved me. We were partners in everything. "Partners?" Elizabeth scoffed. Is that what you call it when you couldn't even give him children? When you quit your job and became a burden? Face it, Clara, you were never good enough for my son." Her words cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. "I took care of Mark," I said, my voice shaking. "I was there for him when he needed me most." Elizabeth's face contorted with rage. "And where were you when he died? Off scribbling your little stories while my son took his last breath alone." The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of Mark's desk for support. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Elizabeth sneered. "You were too wrapped up in your own little world to notice my son slipping away. Some wife you were." Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to breathe. "Elizabeth, please, this isn't what Mark would have wanted. Don't you dare presume to know what my son would have wanted," she hissed. "Mark is gone, and it's time you accepted that. This charade of yours ends now. I want you out of this house by the end of the week." "You can't do this," I whispered, my mind reeling. "This is my home." Elizabeth's eyes glittered with malice. "Watch me. If you're not gone by Friday, I'll have the locks changed and your things thrown out on the street. It's time you faced reality, Clara. You're not family. You never were." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my life. I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body as the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was alone, truly, completely alone. The home I had shared with Mark, the life we had built together, was being ripped away from me. And the worst part was, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe Elizabeth was right. Maybe I hadn't been enough for Mark. Maybe I didn't deserve this home, these memories. As the sun set outside the window, casting long shadows across the room, I knew I had a decision to make. I could fight Elizabeth, cling to the remnants of my life with Mark, or I could find the strength to start anew. With trembling hands, I reached for the photo album, opening it to the last picture Mark and I had taken together. His smile, so full of love and life, seemed to give me strength. I traced his face one last time, then slowly closed the book. It was time to write a new chapter in my story, even if it meant leaving behind everything I had ever known. I stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I clutched a mug of cold coffee. Elizabeth's ultimatum echoed in my mind: leave by Friday or be thrown out. I had less than 48 hours to decide my fate. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. I opened it to find my Aunt Martha, her kind face creased with concern. "Clara, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay?" I broke down in her arms, weeks of pent-up grief and frustration pouring out. Between sobs, I told her everything: Elizabeth's cruelty, the threat of eviction, my fear of losing the last connection to Mark. Martha listened, her eyes growing harder with each word. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "Clara, you need to fight this. That house is as much yours as it is Elizabeth's." I shook my head. "I can't, Martha. I'm so tired of fighting. Maybe it's time I let go." "Let go?" Martha's voice rose. "Clara, this isn't just about a house. It's about your life with Mark, your memories, your future. You can't let Elizabeth bully you out of that." As if summoned by her name, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of disdain. "Well, if it isn't the cavalry," she sneered, "come to talk some sense into her?" Martha stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "I've come to support my niece, Elizabeth, something you seem incapable of doing for your own daughter-in-law." Elizabeth's eyes flashed. "Daughter-in-law? Please, Clara was nothing more than a temporary distraction for Mark. Now that he's gone, it's time for her to move on." I flinched at her words, but Martha wasn't backing down. "How dare you? Clara was Mark's wife, his partner. She has every right to be here." "Rights?" Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "The only rights here are mine. This house belongs to me now, and I want her out." Something snapped inside me. I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. "No, Elizabeth. This house was Mark's, and he wanted me to have it. I'm not leaving." Elizabeth's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" She lunged forward, her hand raised as if strike me. Martha intercepted, grabbing Elizabeth's wrist. "That's enough, Clara. Go pack a bag. You're coming with me." "But—" I started to protest. "Now, Clara," Martha insisted. "We need to talk to a lawyer." As I hurried upstairs, I heard Elizabeth's shrill voice. "A lawyer? Go ahead, you'll see. I'll make sure she has nothing left when I'm done." My hands trembled as I threw clothes into a suitcase. This was it, the moment everything changed. I was leaving the home Mark and I had shared, possibly for the last time. As I zipped the bag closed, my gaze fell on our wedding photo on the nightstand. Mark's smile, so full of love and hope, seemed to give me strength. I picked up the frame, clutching it to my chest. "I'm sorry, Mark," I whispered. "I tried to hold on, but I don't know if I can anymore." Downstairs, Martha was waiting by the door, her face grim. "Come on, honey. We'll figure this out." As we stepped outside, Elizabeth's voice rang out behind us. "Don't bother coming back, Clara. Next time I'll have you arrested for trespassing." The door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet street. I stumbled, overwhelmed by the finality of it all. Martha steadied me, her arm around my shoulders. "It's not over, Clara. We'll fight this, I promise." As we drove away, I watched the house, my home, grow smaller in the rearview mirror. The life I had known, the future Mark and I had planned, seemed to be slipping away with each passing mile. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever before. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and emotional turmoil. But as the car carried me away from everything I had ever known, I realized that this might be my last chance to reclaim not just my home, but my very identity. The question was, did I have the strength to fight for it? The keys to my new apartment felt cold and unfamiliar in my hand as I unlocked the door. The small, one-bedroom space was a far cry from the home I'd shared with Mark, but it was mine. No Elizabeth, no painful memories lurking around every corner. I set down the last of my boxes and surveyed my new kingdom. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it held the promise of a fresh start. I could almost hear Mark's voice encouraging me. "You've got this, Clara. Time to write your own story." With a deep breath, I unpacked my laptop and set it on the rickety kitchen table. It was time to get back to work, to lose myself in the worlds I created on the page. As I began to type, the words flowed more freely than they had in months. Hours passed, and I barely noticed the sun setting outside my window. I was deep in the throes of writing when my phone buzzed, startling me. Elizabeth's name flashed on the screen. My finger hovered over the decline button, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered, my voice wary. "Clara?" Elizabeth's voice sounded strained, almost panicked. I need your help." I sat back, stunned. "My help? With what?" "The house," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "There's so much to manage. The taxes, the repairs. I don't know how you and Mark did it all." A bitter laugh escaped me. "We managed it together, Elizabeth, something you never understood." "Please," she begged. "I don't know who else to turn to. You know this house better than anyone." For a moment, I was tempted. The thought of being back in my home, surrounded by the life Mark and I had built, was almost overwhelming. But then I remembered Elizabeth's cruel words, the way she'd thrown me out without a second thought. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," I said, my voice firm. "But that's not my problem anymore. You wanted the house, and now it's yours to deal with." But I cut her off. "No, Elizabeth, you made your choice. Now you have to live with it." I ended the call, my hand shaking. Part of me felt guilty for turning her away, but a larger part felt liberated. For the first time since Mark's death, I'd stood up for myself, set a boundary. Energized, I turned back to my writing. The words flowed even faster now, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. I was no longer just Clara, Mark's widow. I was Clara, the writer, forging her own path. Days turned into weeks, and I fell into a routine. Write, submit, repeat. The rejections stung, but each one only made me more determined. And then, finally, an acceptance. A small literary magazine wanted to publish one of my short stories. As I celebrated with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Martha. "Clara, honey," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Have you spoken to Elizabeth recently?" I sighed. "She called a few weeks ago, asking for help with the house. I told her no." Martha was quiet for a moment. "Well, it seems she's in over her head. The neighbors called me. Apparently the house is falling into disrepair. Elizabeth can't keep up with it." A pang of guilt shot through me. "That's unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility anymore, Martha." "I know, dear," Martha said softly, "but, well, there's more. Elizabeth is talking about selling the house." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Selling? But that's our home. Mark's home." "I know," Martha replied. "I thought you should know. in case you wanted to do something about it. As I hung up the phone, I felt as if I was standing on the edge of a precipice. On one side was the new life I'd begun to build, free from Elizabeth's toxicity. On the other, the home filled with memories of Mark, the life we'd shared. I glanced at my laptop, at the story I'd just sold, then at the photo of Mark on my desk. His smile seemed to challenge me, asking what I was going to do next. In that moment, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. The question was, did I have the strength to fight for my past while still moving towards my future? The doorbell's chime echoed through my apartment, jolting me from my writing trance. I opened the door to find Aunt Martha, her face etched with concern. "Clara, honey," she said, stepping inside. "We need to talk about Elizabeth." My stomach clenched. "What's she done now?" Martha sighed, settling onto my worn sofa. "It's not what she's done. It's what she's lost. The house, Clara. She sold it." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "Sold it? But how? When?" "Last week," Martha replied. "For a fraction of its worth, too. She didn't know the first thing about real estate." I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. "What about the car? Mark's things?" Martha's eyes filled with pity. "Gone. All of it. She sold everything she could and gambled away the rest." A sob caught in my throat. "But why? How could she do that?" "Oh, honey," Martha said softly, "Elizabeth never knew how to manage on her own. Without Mark, without you, she was lost." The irony of it all hit me like a tidal wave. Elizabeth, who had been so determined to push me out, had ended up losing everything herself. "Where is she now?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Martha shook her head. "That's the thing. No one knows. She's burned bridges with every family member who tried to help. Last I heard, she was staying at a motel on the edge of town." I stood up, pacing the small room. I should feel satisfied, shouldn't I? After everything she put me through, this feels like justice. "But you don't, do you?" Martha asked gently. I stopped, staring out the window at the city below. "No," I whispered. "I feel sad. For her, for Mark, for the life we all could have had if things had been different." Martha joined me at the window, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You have a good heart, Clara. That's why Mark loved you so much." Her words sparked something in me. I turned to face her, a new resolve burning in my chest. "I need to see her, Martha. One last time." The motel was as dingy as I'd imagined. I knocked on room 13, my heart pounding. When the door opened, I barely recognized the woman before me. Elizabeth, once so proud and put together, looked haggard and defeated. "Clara," she croaked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Hello, Elizabeth," I said softly. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, wordlessly. The room was a mess, clothes strewn about, empty bottles littering every surface. "Why are you here?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath. "Because despite everything, you're family, and I think Mark would have wanted me to check on you." At the mention of Mark's name, Elizabeth crumpled. Sobs racked her body as years of grief and bitterness poured out. I hesitated for a moment before wrapping my arms around her, my own tears falling freely. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, two women united in loss and regret. When the tears finally subsided, I pulled back, looking Elizabeth in the eye. "It's time to start over," I said firmly. "Both of us." Elizabeth nodded, a glimmer of hope in her tired eyes. "But how? I've lost everything." I smiled, a plan forming in my mind. "Not everything. You still have family, Elizabeth, and I think I might have an idea." As we left the motel room together, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The house was gone, along with many of the physical reminders of my life with Mark. But I realized that the most important things, the memories, the love, the lessons learned, were still with me. I glanced at Elizabeth, seeing her not as an enemy, but as a fellow traveler on this journey of grief and healing. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months I felt truly hopeful. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than she had been before. I smiled, hearing Mark's voice in my head. "That's my girl. Keep writing your story, Clara. The best chapters are yet to come." And as the sun set on this chapter of my life, I knew that he was right. The end of one story was just the beginning of another, and this time I was ready to be the author of my own tale.